Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. The board's looking a little empty. I'm actually going through everything I made last year and trying to make up my mind for my top 5 lures of last year. And if you're new to the channel, my name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer, and a lure maker, and an avid fisherman. And I make these YouTube videos to share the techniques that I've come up with and some that I've learned, and to add a little bit of engineering and physics to the art of lure making. So I'm reviewing all the builds that I did last year and trying to decide which ones really are my favorite. And I'm going to judge these things by a few categories. Number one, did they work? Did they function? Did they perform in the water the way I planned them to perform? And did they catch fish? Number two, did they add a little bit of something new to lure making in general? Number three, were they a challenge to design and engineer? And lastly, did they end up being a good looking lure that made people want to build it? So it's been tough looking at these things and trying to figure out which ones are really my top 5. Let me show you a couple that didn't make it to the top 5, but are definitely worth an honorable mention. The Jitterbug, which, while it wasn't a unique design, it had some real challenges, especially since I made my own blade. And the Blood Belly, which, if you watch the videos, you knew I struggled to get this thing to work, to hold all that fluid in there and not leak. And there's 2 or 3 more that I would like to include in it, but let's get right to my top 5 list.
Number 5, the mullet.
Not the haircut, the fish.
The engineering was pretty straightforward. I designed it as a lipped crankbait with a break in the middle of the body. The bib angle was really important. I wanted this lure to be really realistic, so I did a little bit of carving and I put a little fin on the back for the added realism. I added some paint details, including these stripes, some shadows, and finally some foil pectoral fins. And we ended up with one of the prettiest lures I made in 2022. And it looked good in the water too. Number 4, the dime shad. This one took a little extra head scratching since I was using a dime for the bib. That meant I had to design the lure around the weight of that bib. I used a pretty piece of cypress and cut it out on the bandsaw. I used twisted wire screw and eyes, and I liked the grain on this wood so much I gave this thing a half of a paint job, leaving the bottom half natural so the grain showed. This was a unique looking lure, both in the shop and in the water. Number 3, the improved magic swimmer. This is based on an existing lure, and my idea was to improve the action of this lure and the looks, and I'm doing that by changing the shape and most of the dimensions. But I used a blown up version of the existing lure as a template. I cut the rough shape out on the bandsaw and then took it over to the belt sander to refine it a little bit. And then I had to partially cut the joints just so I could shape it and refine the shape a little more until I had a shape that met what my vision really was. And you can see it's almost a completely different lure. After installing some hardware and doing a little bit of carving for the added detail, I calculated the amount of weight and location for this lure so it would sink nice and level. Then I separated the pieces so I could sand them and prepare them to do a temporary assembly, just to see how the action would be. I added some foil to the detail and tested it in the test tank. Then it was time to paint, and I was going with a classic shad color, just a few details, and this lure ended up being my second favorite as far as looks. And the swimming action was just as I envisioned it. Number 2, the 3D glass shad. This was made with multiple layers of Lex sand And the design was really straightforward. It's just a shad shape designed to be a basic twitch bait. The bandsaw made quick work of cutting this out, and then off to the belt sander to get the initial shape. The real secret to this lure is the multi-layers of paint throughout the layers of Lexan that give it that 3D effect. Each side of each piece gets a slightly different effect. They have to be glued with a transparent glue, so I used UV cure resin and just stick it under the light to get it to cure. A little bit of hand sketching for some detail, and you end up with a really neat effect with the lines on the inside of the lure. Back to the paint booth for some more details. A little bit of lipstick, and these things are about ready to get glued together. And back to the ultraviolet light. After installing the body hardware, it's back to the paint booth for a little bit of white on the bottom, black on the top, some eyes, and a final clear coat to give it protection and make it look really good. I really love the 3D effect in this lure. I think it just looks awesome, and the flash in the water is really good. So let's take a look. And it's not just pretty, it actually produces fish. I caught a few that day, but unfortunately, shortly after this one, I got cut off. And finally, number 1, the spinner belly. This is a one-off design that actually took a little bit of intuitioneering to get all these forces to line up across the center of the body. I decided to make it out of a piece of cherry I had laying around, and of course, cut it out with the bandsaw. That inside radius was tricky to cut, and it also made me have to use a drum sander to get it shaped up and smoothed out. And then I used the belt sander to get it shaped and refine the corners and edges, working towards a rounded and symmetric shape. I decided to go ahead and hollow out the cheeks to allow water to flow across the spinner blade, and you can see here. I wanted to use a single wire harness system, so I carved a groove all the way around. This way I could use one piece of wire as all the hook hangers and the tie-on eye. To get the exact amount of weight and the location of the weight took a little bit of work, but I got it in the end. And I had to be sure all the calculations included all the hardware that would be on the lure. No carving on this one, just a simple eye socket. After filling in a clear coat, we're ready to get some paint on it. I started out with a reflective silver base. The idea is to have transparent paints over top of this and have the light shine through all of the paint. I added a little bit of scale effect, then a little bit of a spatter pattern to give it a little more interest. I gave it some red eyes and then installed the swivel for the spinner, and then put the spinner on it, and we're ready to take it to the water. Man, that was a big fish. I saw a wake behind the swim bait and I slowed it down, and that fish came out of the darkness. It was huge. But it brings to mind the fact that you really can't have a favorite lure, especially if you do a big variety of fishing like I do. Lakes, reservoirs, the ocean, the beach, rivers, anywhere I can cast a lure, and I fish across a lot of different species. You would have to have a lot of different favorites, and realistically my favorite lure is always going to be the one catching the fish that day. So if you guys have a favorite lure that I made, or a favorite lure that you have that you would like to see me make, let me know. And if you're enjoying the content on this channel, share it with your friends. I'm really trying to build the channel so we can have a bigger community of like-minded fishermen and maybe even lure makers. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe and leave me a thumbs up. It really does help build the channel, and I really appreciate it. All right, we'll have to leave it there, and I'll see you next Friday for probably a lure build.